Okay, welcome to Hopeifiers. I am the acapellist, and with me is Brother Scott Sweetman. How are you doing there, Brother Scott?
I'm doing good. I have a bit of a lighting problem, as you may have just saw, but other than that, I'm doing great.
Excellent, excellent. Yes, and you were just in the middle of telling me about hope stoves. So this guy makes these hope stoves, or no, what is it? Tell me. You were just in the
Yeah,
middle of
I
telling me.
think this is something we might want to share with our viewers, actually. And I know that we're going to talk about hope and politics, and I also want to say to our viewers that we're going to have a bit of a truncated show tonight. There, we've got a topic that I want to introduce, but I also want to share with you and our viewers the idea of a hope stove. So we're going to run for about 20 minutes tonight, folks. I'm going to explain about the hope stove. We're going to introduce the topic of hope and politics. I'm going to give you a little bit of stuff to look up because it's something that we want to talk about in a little bit of depth, and then we'll do that next week. Okay, so that's tonight's agenda. That works for you, Al? Great. Okay, so and I'm really sorry we didn't have time to discuss this beforehand, but it's something I came across today from a young shooter that you and I both taught, Al. Kale Miyashiro posted it.
Oh yeah.
And some people who don't know Kale so well think that he's one of these sort of young guns, revving. He's into cars and he's in all sorts of things, but he's a really caring, loving individual. And like a lot of us when we're younger, of course he goes through a lot of transitions and runs into a lot of things he's got to make decisions on, and I have so much faith in him as a person because he's really driven from a place of caring about other people, and I think that comes a lot from his mother and his grandmother and who anyone who knows. Go ahead, Al.
Sorry.
Go ahead. If you just mute it, I can. Okay, so anyway, I saw this on Facebook today, and I really want to share it with Al, and I really want to share it with all of you because I think it's something that is relevant in a lot of communities. I know I was downtown yesterday to look at some leaves and get out and about a little bit, and I was really surprised to see what looks like the start of a tent community just in behind the RCMP building. I was just saying, Al, that I was really surprised yesterday. I went out for a drive, or I was taken out for a drive to look at the leaves and do some other stuff. And I was really, really surprised to see the start of a tent community in behind the RCMP building. And when I was in Asia, they're commonplace. And we were there just before the World's Expo in Japan, which I was part of as a consultant for the Japanese government. And one of the things that they did that was really controversial is they removed all of the blue tarp communities, they're called, because in Japan they use blue tarps, and you can see them under the big overpasses and all the parks. And typically in Japanese culture, they're just left alone people who they say people, who want to live like that can live like that, and they're relatively left to there themselves. I was really surprised to see that in downtown Lethbridge yesterday. You know what I'm talking about, obviously.
Yep. Yeah. I was there. I've been there a couple times. I was there with the Green and Gold group. We went out there and handed out some sandwiches and such like that, and met some of the campers there in there that came out for some food and such, and a conversation. So
I saw.
I didn't quite get the connection between Kale Miyashiro. He's a fine young man. What was it about? He made a post or something?
Yeah, he did a post on Facebook today about a good idea, and it was on something called a hope stove. And mostly because it was Kale and because it sounded interesting and had hope in the title, I clicked on it, which is, I think, fortuitous because it was something that I think is very interesting and something that apparently has become very relevant in our community as well. And, we've had a homeless situation and a street person situation in Lethbridge for many years. It's not something that's new. It just continues to get worse. And I know that community groups and law enforcement and EMS and everyone is certainly trying to do what they can, but the problem persists. And so what the Hope Stove is, a couple, in Nanaimo, BC, came up with an idea of creating what they called a hope stove. And you can make them at home, and they distribute them to homeless or street people especially relevant heading into winter, because these little stoves can be used to generate heat, and they're pretty safe for cooking and having around. Of course, there are some issues. Oxygen, carbon monoxide are in a sealed space. They shouldn't be used. But if you're living in a tent out in the middle of winter, that's not usually such an issue. There's lots of cold air coming in there. And let me explain these to you, because I think they're quite an interesting idea. And I don't know if they could be applied to our community, but certainly from having camped out in cold weather myself, without a heat source, it's a deadly proposition, right?
Sure, you bet. No question.
I know that when I first came to Lethbridge, I was a little bit shocked to see a lot of homeless people or street people gathered under the exhaust vent at Ellison Mills. Have you ever seen that in the wintertime?
Yeah.
Because it vents hot air.
Yeah.
The mall and places like that, they get moved on and they're not allowed to stay in to stay warm, which I think is a controversial topic. But anyway, so what these stoves are is this couple put out a request to the community for old candles that people were using. And the reason for the candles is it provided fuel to these Hope stoves. And then they went to Home Depot or Home Hardware or a home supply store, and they bought empty paint cans. You can buy them. They're just a light aluminum can with a lid. You've seen them? You know what I'm talking about?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
Okay. And then so they very carefully, and I'll put the link on the Acapellas page tonight. I'll do it as soon as we're done here.
Okay.
And they do a little video on how to do it. So they just melt all of these candles, and they just melt them in a big pot in the stove. And they've got so industrious that they actually mounted a spigot on the bottom of a big pot to make it easier to pour, but you can use sort of any old pot. And I know in my house, there's a plethora of old candles kicking around that are partly used and all of that's good. The wax in them is still good fuel. So they melt all of these candles together, and then they fill, I don't know. So the paint can is about this tall and this around. Yeah. And they fill that about a quarter of the way with this candle wax.
Yeah.
And then he just takes a hand punch and pushes it through this really light aluminum. And so again, so the wax is put in about a quarter of the way up, and then another quarter of the way up the can. Or maybe a third. Yeah, the can would be divided into thirds, I guess. So a third of wax, and then another third. He puts the first row of holes around it.
Okay.
In the side of the stove. And then about an inch up, 2 inches from that, which takes it about an inch away from the rim, if you can imagine, he puts another set of holes.
Okay.
And he explained that the first set of holes allows air to come into the can, and the top set of holes allows the heat to come out.
Yeah. Cool.
And then on the top, he puts the lid on, and then in the top, he puts 4 or 5 more holes.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay? And that makes the stove. So you could set a pot on it, or at least heat up some water for a warm drink, or heat up some instant noodles, or a can of soup, or beans, or something like that.
Yeah.
And so then they take the lid off again, and they take a cotton string that's available at hardware stores or home supplies again, and they dip that in the wax and let it soak in the wax. And they lay it out on a sheet of wax paper, and then they cut it into, 4-inch lengths. You can see the video, and they let it dry a bit, and then they cut it in those lengths. And while this is happening, the wax in the can has started to solidify, and then they put 5 holes. If you can imagine the natural shape of putting 5 holes in a circle. 4 around the edge and 1 in the middle, and then into each of these holes they insert one of these wax wicks.
Okay.
And the wax is still soft enough in the can that it closes back in.
Right.
These wicks, and so then they allow that to solidify all of the wax, and then they distribute these. Put the lid back on, and then they distribute these I would suggest that they would probably have to have matches or a lighter to go with it. But the idea is that when these wicks are lit, that the heat will rise up. The first set of holes will pull in the air. The second set of holes will allow heat, and the small amount of smoke that's generated to come out of the can. The 5 wicks can be lit, just one if a little bit of light is needed, or you can light them all if you need more heat or more energy created for cooking. And he describes that they're safe because if they're tipped over, the liquid wax will snuff out the candle wicks.
Sure, makes sense.
And so that they won't burn. And what this couple did was they built.
Where's this couple from? Like
Nanaimo, BC.
Nanaimo, you said that. Yeah, cool,
Yeah.
Cool. Great idea. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I've described it very well, but it's a project that a family could do, or a group could do very easily. I like the idea of requesting, neighbors and the community to donate old candles, and they said they really got an overwhelming response, and they had quite a good pile of candles there from the photographs. And this was carried in the news and on video in 2020, I think was the first time this showed up. But just your old friend serendipity sort of popped into my life, and that was a story of Kale about how, yesterday I saw the tent community going up, the weather's getting colder. I was thinking about how, and I've been out hunting with the twins and family when it was like -30 out, and even dressed in rather expensive winter gear, it was almost unbearable to sit still for any amount of time. Yeah. And the idea of being, out on the street with no way to get out of that cold, heading into our Lethbridge winter, which is, as you know, can be quite mild and not so deadly, but it can turn very deadly very quickly. And I think that's a concern for a lot of us who would like to help the community of people who are stuck on the street. And you and I know from our community work, you more than I, that the resources of our community to find available sheltering and places for people, especially if they're struggling with mental health issues or addiction issues or other issues that might make them difficult. And I sort of put that in air quotes because we're all difficult in our own way. But certainly people that are suffering from addiction or mental health issues often are harder for your average person to understand and try and help, right?
Yeah, if I'm like a half hour late for my sandwich, I get cranky. So if you're somebody that's, you're living on the street in the cold, you can't find a washroom to use, you haven't had a shower for 2 days, you haven't eaten for 2 days, I don't think you're going to be at your best, right? I don't think anybody is, right? And if you have then a substance abuse addiction on top of that and health challenges on top of that, life gets real hard, right? So, but what a brilliant, elegant solution these Hope stoves are.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a great idea. I mean, those are like, so the wax is all donated. We got some string and the paint cans, they're what, like $2 each or something like that?
Yeah,
Probably.
exactly. Yeah.
They got to be pretty cheap anyway. So yeah. Cool.
And the tools used to build these things are a pot and a punch. And, it wouldn't have to be a punch. Basically, the aluminum in these cans is so thin that you basically just push through it. And, he just did it with his own person power. He didn't have to hammer it or do anything. I will note that he mentions they put the wax in first so that the can doesn't just crumple when they're putting the holes in it. It adds some rigidity.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense. Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Or the cans would just crunch in.
Right. And that's going to give some kind of form to it. And then you can easily punch in the holes there. Yeah.
And when I searched Hope Stove on the internet, their video came up, but there was lots of other videos creating similar stoves. I've actually built one out of a pop can, a very small one. Very similar technology, if you will, that used a similar shape, just holes punched in the top and the sides, and used what are they called? They're used in chafing dishes. The little solid fuel. Bricks or
Yeah.
circles, and certainly,
Sterno or something. Is that the brand? I
yeah,
think.
like that, but
Yeah.
even cheaper than that. Just comes
Okay.
in plastic, a little blue block, and it was enough to boil a pot of water. So you know,
Yeah.
and I know that one of the recommendations for a winter emergency kit for your car is to make sure you include the candle, because even one candle in a place out of the wind can generate pretty significant heat. The difference may be not being comfortable, obviously, but perhaps a difference between dying and living.
Right.
Uh, so, yeah, their 5-wick candle made a lot of sense to me. So,
Well, what a lovely idea from this couple from Nanaimo. And thanks to Kale Mirchiro for sharing that great idea on Facebook. And yeah, there's going to be people that would benefit from having one of those, that they can throw in their shopping cart if they're a homeless person, and have a heat source with them. Yeah, that's great.
right. And I don't know about the liabilities of donating, making them and donating and all of those things. And it's unfortunate that we live in a society where that's one of the first things that pop into your head is, trying to help somebody. What's my liability and exposure on this here? And, probably I've exposed us by mentioning it on the show. But I do, and I know that you share and are great role model for me in this, is that we really have to look out for the people in our community that maybe don't have the current means to look out for themselves. And I know you work with some great people, and I've certainly met people in my life that have transitioned from a place of normal society, if you will, that through economics or mental health or trauma or economic collapse have found themselves out on the street with no resources and alone. And that's a really scary place to be. When I was a young man, I lived in a post office vestibule for almost a week until the police found me there and called my grandfather. And that was just a case. I had no place to go, and it was a warm place out of the wind. And in the community I was in, they didn't lock it, so I wouldn't exactly call myself homeless. I could have, cap in hand, certainly gone to a family member and stayed there. But at that time, I wasn't willing to ask for help. So
Yes.
Yeah, and we all sort of run into times like that where we just can't or won't or don't have what we need to make those decisions to get help. But on our show, we always tell people, reach out, right?
Yes, definitely we do. Definitely we do.
So
Yes. Wow, love that about the Hope Stoves. That's great.
yeah, and we're running out of time tonight, and you're someone who really knows what's available in the community out there. Do you have some suggestions for people who might find themselves in a situation, or somebody who knows somebody that needs some help? What should be their first stop in our community?
Well, interesting you say that, because when you and I part company, I'm going to connect with a little Zoom link at the library where Shenla is delivering the poverty report for our community. And with that poverty report, then, the conversation comes, okay, yeah, so we need to lobby government. We need to get more resources here. But what can we, as just individual caring members of our community, what can we do? Are there things that we can do? I probably think there are. I don't know what they are yet, but I'm hoping to learn more tonight. So, but something like this couple, they just have this great idea, prepare it, go out and see somebody and say, I made you this. Will this help you? Right? That's beautiful, right? That's, and if the person doesn't want it, well, that's okay too. But if they do, and they just know that somebody's thinking about them, caring about them, and wanting to give them something to help keep them safe, right? That's beautiful.
What an excellent point, Al, because I know that many of us have been at points in our lives where one person's care, one person's demonstration of care have kept us from doing something stupid or something that can't be undone. And, often when people get to that point, it's a very transitional point, but when you're in it, you can't see past it. Right. And
Right.
it's just that one person showing that they genuinely care, offering assistance. I love the story of the girl that phoned you and was on the docket, but didn't know how to deal with the fact that she couldn't be there and somehow had gotten your phone number. and you helped her through that and helped direct her to the good folks at Lethbridge Family Services. So
I just on a related note, I had a call a couple of weeks ago from, I think she said her name was Amanda, and I'm not even sure who it was. It says, "Hey, this is Amanda." I said, "Oh, hey, Amanda, how you doing?" She says, "I got flowers for my birthday. Did you send them?" I said, "No, I did not, Amanda, but happy birthday." And then I hung up, and then I thought about it for a minute. I called her back and then sang happy birthday to her, right? So,
oh, that's wonderful. Well done. Well done. It probably made her happy, first of all, that somebody sent her flowers, and second of all, somebody that she called by accident would pick up on her celebratory day and sing her happy birthday. But I do think it's important in our community and important as a person that it doesn't always have to be a big grand thing. Like you said, these little stoves cost them maybe wick and can and driving and stuff, and the price
Hey,
of
you
gas
know what?
here.
And not even the cost. Just think about just taking the time to have the conversation. Today, I stopped to pick up the mail. And when I picked up the mailbox is right by the schoolyard, right?
Right.
And some 3 boys come running over. "Hey, is that a Tesla?" So I had things to do, but okay, let's talk about Tesla with the boys here, right? So there was, what was their name? Gage. I only remember Gage, but there was 3 boys. We had a nice chat about Tesla and about cars, and I showed them how the doors open, and just spend a little bit of time having a conversation with them and sharing in their excitement. That's a fun thing, right? So
the gift of time is amazing. But I promised we were going to move on. We're going to have a little bit of a short show tonight. I do want to comment on our topic, and that's going to be hope in politics and non-cynical discussion. Okay. And the reason that caveat's in there is that we've sort of experienced hope burnout. If you look back to the 2020s, if you remember the campaign of Barack Obama, the very famous Hope poster, during that time period, politicians of all stripes were really pushing the idea of their particular brand of politics being the only hope to get out of the ills that were starting to present themselves at that time. And now we find ourselves fully in a lot of those predicted ills in terms of economic downturns and health concerns. And now there's so much going on in the world. The British Prime Minister stepped down. She was only in office for a couple of weeks.
Oh.
They've had 3 prime ministers in it's crazy short a period of time. Wow. So a lot of instability going on around the world. And one of the questions that comes up is there room for genuine hope in politics? And how do we know when everyone's promising us hope, is there any real promise in hope for the future?
That is a great discussion point. So next week, we're going to be discussing about hope in politics. Does it even exist? Is it going to be probably right up on one of the first questions. Does it exist?
That's our first
scam to get people elected. Which way is it?
Which way? Okay. And as always, us at Hopeifiers, myself and the acapellist Alan Friesen, will adopt a non-cynical view because we believe in people. We believe in the hope and the success of individuals, communities, and humankind.
Oh, beautifully said, Brother Scott. All right, brother. We're going to talk next week.
You bet. Take care. See you next week, my friend. See you next week, everyone. Bye.